Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, Playtest 7 was released last week, and the online reaction has been surprisingly positive. And I don't mean surprising because Playtest 7 isn't good. I mean surprising because, certainly in the case of the last few playtests, I think basically everything since the first draft of the Druid has been overwhelmingly negative, despite, at least in my opinion, a lot of nuggets of good ideas in those playtests. Anyways, apparently this one was what was required to start turning around the online negativity, which is great, in my opinion. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to break down every little change, whether it's a change in wording or a mechanical tweak, but basically I'm going to go over the entire document. However, to launch that off, what I'm going to do today is highlight what I think are the most notable changes or new material that we see in Playtest 7 and give a bit of a breakdown on my opinions on how these impact the evolution of the playtest. Some of these things are great, others need work, and others I think are a step backwards. And as always, I won't be candid regarding my opinions. I think I'll start with the stuff that I think is terrific, and this is a pretty big list. Let's just start here. Just a tiny little design note that says the 2024 Player's Handbook will clarify that any creature can voluntarily fail any saving throw. I think most DMs play this way now, but if you do, technically it's a house rule, because 5th edition gives the player no avenue to voluntarily fail a saving throw. Of course, most of the time you roll a saving throw, you want to succeed, but there's some cases where that's not the case. Like, imagine you're telling someone something that's true, but they don't believe you. So they use a Zone of Truth spell. If you make the saving throw, they know you made it and are capable of lying to them. You aren't lying, and you want them to know it, so you actually want to fail the save. But there's no rule allowing you to do that. Just adding this little note tells us the designers are aware of the issue, and it's getting addressed. Here's another little design note that is very appreciated. So the invisible condition in 5th edition is worded in such a way that being able to see an invisible creature doesn't negate their advantage to attack you or your disadvantage to attack them. Jeremy Crawford even confirmed that players who noticed this little tidbit were very clever, and indeed that's how it works and how it's supposed to work, and gave examples of the Predator in that movie being kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see them, and the playtests have gone back and forth in how invisibility and spells like See Invisibility or features like True Sight interact. But here we have confirmation that the interaction is an unintended loophole that is being closed. So I'd consider this confirmation that the loophole will remain closed in the 2024 Player's Handbook. So, when Jeremy Crawford said that a few spells were being redesigned in Playtest 7, and he talked about the jump spell, but not the shield spell, or web, or simulacrum, or wall of force, or conjure animals, I said, and I stand behind this, that jump wasn't a priority spell to be addressed. But damned if this isn't cool. Jump changes to a bonus action, giving an upcast option where you can target multiple creatures, and for the next minute you can jump once on your turn, 30 feet, any direction, and it only uses 10 feet of movement. Okay, so now I actually want the jump spell. I mean, I might even start taking Otherworldly Leap on my Warlock so I can cast this over and over again. I don't think I would call this one of the best first level spells, but it's really good. And I love that they've taken a spell that nobody takes and made it so you might actually want to take it. Hopefully this just becomes one of many examples where they do exactly this. Speaking of spells they fixed, when Sorcerous Burst was introduced in Playtest 5, I said that I would never cast it with my Sorcerer, and I said what I thought needed to happen to fix it. You can go back and check if you like, but what I said is that I like the idea behind the spell and the thematics of the spell, but for a sorcerer to actually want to cast a spell over other attack cantrips, the die type needed to be a D8. So they changed the die type to a D8. I also said the limit on the number of exploding dice was basically pointless because of statistical probability of something happening mathematically already takes care of the issue of potentially unending exploding dice. But that limitation is still in, and I don't think it really does anything, but on the upside, I don't think it really does anything. So it's just some extra words, and this is now a good cantrip. Speaking of sorcerer spells, I really dislike some of them, and those spells are gone. One spell I did like was Arcane Eruption, and it's still here. Great. The only change here is that they changed the saving throw from Constitution to Dexterity, which makes sense because it's described as an explosion, and these kinds of effects normally are Dexterity saves. Now for one that's going to be controversial, but they nerfed Counterspell, and they nerfed it good. So here it is, and here's how it works. First, the trigger is made far more clear. You take the reaction when you see a creature within 60 feet casting a spell with verbal, somatic, or material components. That is a clarification that we have been sorely missing. When you cast Counterspell, the target makes a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, the spell doesn't go off, and they lose the action or bonus action or reaction to cast it. But they don't lose the spell slot. So basically, you can't count on Counterspell working. And even if it does work, the target might try casting the same spell again next round. And if they have legendary resistances, they can use them to shut down the Counterspell. Oh, and on the other hand, if your Counterspell is counterspelled, you also get the saving throw, and if you make it, the Counterspell goes off, and if you don't, you get to keep the spell slot. Now here is the thing, I'm seeing some negative reaction to this one, that players would never take it or cast Counterspell ever again. And I get when something powerful takes a hard nerf, it can hurt. And there are examples that I'm going to be going over in this video where something powerful got nerfed and it really did bother me. But this isn't one of them. In this case, I've been a proponent of Counterspell being nerfed all along. And I'm telling you right now, I'd still take this spell. I'd still cast this spell. And I would still recommend this spell. Not all spellcasters have legendary resistances, and not all spellcasters have good Constitution saving throws. Just our spellcasters do because we're optimizers. And I'm okay with the hard nerf here, because for the nerf to be going too far, I would need to not want to take or cast this spell anymore. And in my opinion, that's not the case. It's courageous of the designers to hard nerf an overpowered spell, and to be frank, I hope that courage continues and we see more of this. But this is a great start on what my opinion is the most necessary change to the game of all. That overpowered outlier spells get brought in line. One down. Okay, moving on. Here's Reckless Attack, the second level Barbarian feature in Playtest 7. Now, I've always liked Reckless Attack. It allows the Barbarian to make their melee strength-based attacks with advantage, but it grants advantage to enemies attacking them until their next turn. Two things that have always bugged me about Reckless Attack. First, I figured you should be able to use it with thrown weapons, and Playtest 5 addressed that, which I very much appreciated. And second, you couldn't apply Reckless to off-turn reaction attacks, even though you were still suffering from the advantage granted to your enemies. They've addressed that in Playtest 7, and now if you attack recklessly, it lasts until the start of your next turn. So an off-turn attack you make using your reaction is going to have advantage as well. This might not be a huge change, but it feels big. Of course, Reckless should have always lasted until the start of your next turn, both the upside of it and the downside. Now, I think I've been pretty consistent in saying that I generally like the optional class features from Tasha's, and I'm in favor of them being codified in the classes. I mean, we've playtested this stuff for years now, and I think in general, they're pretty popular. So, Instinctive Pounce, the Barbarian optional class feature, has been added to the Barbarian. And I don't think I have a lot to say here beyond good. And here's Action Surge. In Playtest 5, Action Surge was nerfed, so when you used it, there were only a few actions you could choose from. You could do the attack action and a couple other things. Dash, disengage, or dodge, I believe. The 3 Ds. Now, the one thing we all noticed immediately is that meant the end of taking 2 levels of fighter, so your wizard could cast 2 one-action spells on their turn, which was probably a good change, because I think we can all probably agree that Action Surge, as a fighter feature, should be best for the fighter, not the wizard. However, on additional reflection and playtesting that version, I did find we had to constantly reference the feature because Maybe the fighter wanted to hide with their action surge, or use an object, or drink a potion, only to discover those actions weren't covered. Now, playing with reasonable players, we always had a quick solution, so I guess the fighter used the object with their base action and action surge to attack or whatever, but it was unnecessary restrictions that prevented, or at least made things more difficult, that fighters might actually want to do. So it corrected the problem, but it went too far. Now, you just can't use the extra action for the magic action. Problem solved. Now, my favorite change to the fighter in Playtest 5 was Indomitable, which has generally been a feature that allows a fighter to fail the same saving throw twice in a row. They buffed it, so when you re-roll the saving throw, you added your fighter level as a bonus to the roll. That is a big bonus. I loved that. And then you could use Indomitable multiple times when you got to level 18. So they've kept the bonus, but now they've introduced the 5th edition scaling, so it's usable twice at level 13 and 3 times at level 17. This is just a more linear scaling of the feature, and 2 thumbs up. I guess it's technically exponential scaling, I suppose, because the uses and bonus are both increasing, but I think you get my point. The extra uses aren't all piled up at once at ultra high level. More fighter stuff. Studied attacks. I don't think I'm alone in wanting the fighter to have more reasons to stay fighter past level 11. Well, here's a good one. This is a new feature, and it grants the fighter advantage to attack an enemy if they have already attacked that enemy and missed. Jeremy Crawford explained the thematics of the feature. When a creature is missed by the fighter is figuring out those defenses and figuring out how to get past them, so they get advantage on their next attack. Makes sense. But mainly, this is a nice little offensive mechanical boost at a point in their progression where the fighter could use a nice little offensive boost. I mean, it's a long journey from level 11 to 20. Sprinkling in features like this really helps. On to the Sorcerer. Here's Innate Sorcery gained at level 1. It's a bonus action, lasts a minute, and increases the DC of your Sorcerer spells by 1, and gives you advantage on attack rolls of your Sorcerer spells. And you can use this twice per long rest. Now, I've talked about the difference in identity between Sorcerer and Wizard several times in videos past, but I'm going to repeat it again. The Wizard knows the most spells, and they have a versatility in spellcasting unmatched by any other class. The Sorcerer, on the other hand, doesn't have that versatility, but they are experts at casting the spells they have. This feature defines that class identity even more. And along with a few other features, sorcerers and wizards are very distinct from each other in this playtest. For example, here's Sorcery Incarnate. In playtest 5, this was a spell, and I despised it. It used your concentration and was a 5th level spell. Now it's just a scaling of innate sorcery, allowing the sorcerer to apply a second metamagic on a spell they cast, and giving the sorcerer the ability to use innate sorcery additional times by spending 2 sorcery points. And I have gone from a hater to a supporter. Sorcery Incarnate is now terrific. And the Sorcerer Capstone. This is fantastic. So in Playtest 5, the Sorcerer had this broken capstone where they got free wish spells and ignored the penalty for casting wish to do other things other than replicate spells, and it was broken. And it needed to be reined in. So now it lets you use 1 metamagic option on each of your turns for free when you're using innate magic. This is a powerful capstone, and it's not broken. So, perfect. Of course, if we're talking about the difference in class identity between wizard and sorcerer, and then sorcerers get all this stuff to make the spells they cast better, well, then the wizard should probably get stuff to make their casting more versatile as well. Otherwise, why play a wizard? Well, for spell versatility, I guess first off, I should say class spell lists are back. Now, I didn't mind the generic lists that much. I mean, I like them in some ways and not so much in others. But with class spell lists back, the wizard list is the biggest and has the best spells. But they did go further. Here's the 3rd level subclass feature that is notorious in 5th edition for being terrible. The insert spell name here, Savant. Well, these got a huge buff in exactly the right way. They say when you gain the feature, you choose any 2 spells of that school up to level 2 and add them to your spellbook. Then whenever you gain a level where you gain a new level of spell slots, pick another spell from that school up to that level, and add it to your spellbook for free. So that will be 9 additional free spells in your spellbook eventually. That's added spell versatility. But it also actually means that if you play a diviner, for example, that you'll actually have a good variety of divination spells in your spellbook. So that just leaves the warlock. Here is my favorite change to the warlock. Pact boons are now invocations, and the warlock gets additional invocations to account from that right from level 1. This means that your warlock can have multiple pact boons or no pact boon at all if you like. Like I could see making a warlock that just wants to focus on Eldritch Blast, so I take Agonizing Blast right at level 1 and maybe I never take a pact boon at all. You can totally do that now. Or if you want to be both a Tome lock and a Blade lock, you can. So I guess you're a Tome Blade lock. Or a Tome Blade chain lock if you like. I'm not sure it's a power boost, but it's definitely something that gives the warlock significantly more flexibility in their character design and theme. And that's great. I also want to continue this love fest with some of the subclass design. One of my favorites is the Archfey patron. Archfey is generally considered one of the worst warlock subclasses, and for good reason. But it's been completely redesigned, really leaning into the theme of Fey and their ability to teleport. Archfey will be misty stepping all over the place now, and adding little additional effects when they do. So they did a great job here, making the Archfey patron a subclass I actually want to play now, and I will go into the details in a future video. But even more than Archfey, I want to play a Goo lock. If any subclass was considered mechanically weaker than Archfey, it was this one. But I don't think you'll hear that opinion much anymore, because Goo got a big old facelift in this playtest with the addition of some seriously creepy and mechanically strong features, like actually messing up the enemy you telepathically link to, casting enchantment and illusion spells by thought alone, actually imposing disadvantage on saving throws with a hex spell, and using the summon aberration spell without concentration as well as additional buffs to it, but with a 1-minute duration. Speaking of which, one of my favorite things confirmed for the 2024 Player's Handbook, and it's not in writing in this playtest, so I have nothing here to show you, but Jeremy Crawford has confirmed that all Tasha's summoning spells will be in the 2024 Player's Handbook. I love those spells. I did a series of builds that focused on those spells, and I am thrilled to hear they'll all be included in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Now, all we need are for the summoning spells from the 2014 Player's Handbook to be updated to similar design, and if they do that, well, summoning, as far as I'm concerned, is fixed. But the subclasses get better yet. The Eldritch Knight is amazing in the playtest. So they essentially get the Bladesinger's extra attack at level 7, where they can replace an attack with a cantrip. But it's better, because unlike the Bladesinger, the Eldritch Knight can combine that with a fighter's scaling extra attack, meaning an 11th level Eldritch Knight can attack again, and cast a cantrip using one attack action. Eventually, they can cast leveled spells as part of their attack action as well. And here's the really elegant thing. Since their spell casting is using the attack action instead of the magic action, it's not restricted with the fighter's action surge feature. So the one case where action surge should be allowed for spell casting, it is. This is going to be the only case in the game where a character can use an action surge to cast 2 leveled spells with the same action. Really nice. But I have saved the absolute best subclass for last. This is my absolute #1 favorite thing in this entire playtest. The Wild Magic Sorcerer. And right here is the biggest change in the subclass that makes this subclass what it always should have been. And there's other changes in this subclass I like as well, but this is the big one. The DM no longer decides if the player restores their Tides of Chaos when they cast a leveled sorcerer spell, which triggers a Wild Magic Surge. The player decides. Now, personally, I have been running the Wild Magic Sorcerer exactly this way for about a year now. And yes, it is a definite power boost to the subclass, but it is fun as hell. In fact, multiple DMs I've played with have adapted running Wild Magic this way for a while now, and we have yet to not enjoy it run this way. Now, if you don't like playing a character that has this hugely random mechanic of the Wild Magic Surge table, I mean, fair enough. It's not for everyone. But if you are, then this should absolutely delight you. You should be able to roll on that Wild Magic Surge table multiple times every single time you play. Oh, and I better mention this one. So, I don't know if this is going to be universally loved, but I really like it. The rules for heavy weapons have changed. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, if you're small-sized, you have disadvantage to use a heavy weapon. My poor halfling barbarian. But wait, that's gone now. It says you need a strength of 13 for a melee heavy weapon and a dexterity of 13 for a ranged heavy weapon, or you have disadvantage, but your size doesn't matter anymore. Now, maybe it should have been just that you need a strength of 13 required for any heavy weapon, not just melee. I mean, listen, you can twist my rubber arm on that. I'm just making the call now for halfling barbarians of the world to unite. So that's the stuff I unabashedly love. And it's a pretty long list. Now we're going to get into the stuff that I kind of like, but it's not quite there, or it's not ideal, let's say. Like Flex. So the Flex Mastery was easily my least favorite, not just because it was weak, which it was, but it also took a mechanic that you should be able to do more with and did the opposite. Like if you had the Flex Mastery on a weapon, then using the versatile property became mechanically pointless, reducing the versatility of the weapon. A weapon mastery for a versatile weapon should make it more versatile. I mean, it's called versatile. So I really didn't want Flex to appear this way in the 2024 Player's Handbook, and it won't, because they removed it. And I don't mean they removed it and replaced it with something else. I mean, they loosened the restriction on the Sat Mastery and filled in what were formerly Flex weapons with other existing masteries. So, I mean, it does ultimately solve the issue with Flex, but what I was really hoping for was they would redesign Flex, not scrap it altogether. But I guess I'm happier with it being scrapped than existing in this form. So, I guess I'm kind of happy with this, but it's not ideal. Oh, and here's a case of them correcting something bad from a previous playtest, but not quite. Primal Champion got nerfed in playtest 5. The +4s became +2s. Like, why? The last thing they needed to do was nerf a high-level straight-class barbarian. Aim that nerf elsewhere, please. So it's back to the +4s. Great. In the 2024 Player's Handbook, this works great as written. In the playtest, though, I have an issue. Do you see it? If not, let me help you out. Here's how ability score improvements work now. They work the same as in 2014, except for one thing. At level 19, every class gets an ability score improvement, and now they can raise their score up to 22 at level 19. It's kind of cool, and I like it. I like it so much, I'm almost certain to take advantage of it with my 19th level barbarian by increasing my strength to 22. Except, now that limit of 24 as a maximum for these scores ends up screwing me over with my capstone, as I'll only get 2 more to my strength. So I like that they've given us the old capstone back because it's a great capstone. But in the playtest, it needs an update to address the update to ability score increases, and that hasn't happened here. Here's another one. So this is Pact of the Chain, and we're going to be talking about all the pacts. But this is Pact of the Chain, which is now an invocation for warlocks and available at level 2. So it lets you cast Find Familiar with, get this, 1 action. At will. 1 action. Wow. Find Familiar has a casting time of 1 hour. So this is huge. Also, there's additional special forms here, so you have more choices, and that's great. But not really. Because we're not using the 2014 Find Familiar spell. We're using the playtest version of Find Familiar, and that version says you don't use the stat block of the form you selected. You use the otherworldly familiar stat block. Playtest 5 addressed this by giving the Pact of the Chain their own stat block for their special familiars. But this version doesn't do that. So if you choose any of these special forms, you still use the same stat block as any other familiar. So it's cosmetic only. An investment of the Chain Master. Well, this is useless. I mean, Pact of the Chain still gives you the ability to cast Find Familiar at will as an action, and that's good. So you still might want to take Pact to the Chain, but this doesn't really do anything. And now I have to speculate, because I think I know what's going on. I think they've given up on the new Find Familiar spell and are just going back to the 2014 version, and they just forgot to mention it. At least that's my guess. But if that is the case, then I don't think they've thought this through. The Slad Tadpole is friggin' terrible, like worse than your normal Find Familiar options, but the skeleton? That is a medium-sized creature with hands that can take any action except for the attack action, that you can summon as often as you like with an action, then one more action to go back to your Imp Familiar or whatever you had. That opens up options that the designers I don't think have considered. So there are some stuff here I like, but right now it just doesn't work as advertised, and just using these creatures' stat blocks instead creates some problems. So this still needs work. And while we're on the topic of Warlock packs, I have issues with all of them, by the way. Let's go to Pact to the Tome next. Mostly I like this. It's 90% of the way there. You don't just get 3 cantrips anymore. Now you can change those cantrips after any short or long rest, which is great. You also get 2 first level rituals that you can switch out. Terrific. Oh, and you get a first level spell slot for a class that has 0 first level spell slots at level 3 and higher. That's awesome. But let's look at this a little closer. You gain a first level spell slot. Once you expend it, you can't gain another slot from this feature until you finish long rest. Do you see it? What happens if you don't expend it? And then you conjure forth another book after a short or long rest. Does the first slot go away? Because it doesn't say so. This second sentence only applies this restriction once you expend that spell slot. So you get another first level slot, and then another, and another, and we have ourselves a loop. It's the coffee lock, but it's built in now, no more multi-class required. I mean, this one is an easy fix. You can only ever have 1 spell slot from this feature. Done. But let's move on to Pact of the Blade. So I should start with this. This is awesome, and it looks like a ton of fun. It lets you use your charisma modifier for your weapon, you can switch out damage types, and you get a number of options, and the invocations that build on this, Life Drinker and Thirsting Blade, they're awesome too. Oh, and you get the weapon mastery property of your bonded weapon, and you can use your bonus actions to create different weapons, and you get the mastery of whatever weapon you create, or touch a magical weapon, which can be a ranged weapon too, so we're not restricted to melee or anything, and you get that mastery too, and the rest of all this stuff as well. So this looks awesome, but I think a little bit too awesome. I mean, an 11th level Warlock can have a Pact weapon where they get 3 attacks with their attack action, same as a fighter at that level, all with an extra d6 damage, which the fighter doesn't get, and an option to heal themselves after any hit, which a fighter also doesn't get, and flexible damage types, again, fighter doesn't get that, and charisma-based attacks, whether it's ranged or melee, nobody else gets that, add in Otherworldly Leap, and they're more mobile than any other weapon user as well. A player I play with mentioned that the combat feats still aren't a great fit for Blade Pack Warlocks, and that's true, but I don't think you need any of them. This is just better at weapon use than any other class in the game, by a fair amount. Fighters, barbarians, rogues, I mean, at least they were better at one thing than spellcasters, but none of them come close to matching the Warlock now. The fighter gets a lot of masteries. Well, that's nice. My Warlock has all of them, and I get 3 attacks with my attack action at level 11 too, so you don't get that anymore. And I'm single ability score dependent, whether I'm using melee or ranged, and you don't get that. And I have additional damage on every attack, and I can choose between several damage types with every attack, and I'm more mobile than you, and I can heal myself when I hit, and I haven't even cast a spell yet. I appreciate that Pact of the Blade actually makes weapons better than Eldritch Blast. I really do. But they went too far. They tuned this up, but they overtuned. Now let's talk about the new subclasses. There's 2 of them. Here's Path of the World Tree, the new Barbarian subclass, and I'll get into the details in a future video, but for now, let's just say I like the thematics here, but the mechanics leave something to be desired. And it's a first draft, so that's fine, but it needs some adjusting. Same goes for the Brawler. In fact, I'll say the exact same thing. I like the thematics, but the mechanics leave something to be desired. I totally get the opportunity to create a subclass to fit this particular niche, and I hope the final design really hits the bullseye. But it definitely isn't there now. Let's go back to the Warlock. I guess I have a lot of mixed feelings about the Warlock, and I already talked about what I loved about the changes to Invocations, but I don't love everything. And I'm not sure this has been noticed by a lot of people reviewing this playtest, but I sure noticed that they nerfed Invocations in a very important way. With the 2014 Warlock, when you select an invocation, you can switch it for another invocation when you gain a level in Warlock. That option has been removed, meaning when you take an invocation, you better be happy with it because that's it. I have some very mixed feelings about that. And while we're on the Warlock, I realized that the Playtest 5 Warlock was polarizing, and honestly, it did need some work. I playtested it multiple times, and it worked fine for me, but I acknowledge it needed work. Well, it's been completely abandoned, and now Pact Magic is back. I get that a lot of players are absolutely thrilled by this. I am not thrilled with Pact Magic. Never have been. I've always found it limiting and frustrating, particularly when I get to like level 8, 9, or 10. Now, there are some things in this playtest to address those pain points, like the aforementioned Pact of the Tome, but I have mixed feelings about Pact Magic being back. Now, let's move on to the stuff that just hurts. My favorite Barbarian subclass feature is gone. Rage Beyond Death has been completely redesigned, and I really don't like it at all now. Maybe Rage Beyond Death was too good, but I think some moderate nerfs to it would have been fine. But now, it's just gone and replaced with this, whatever this is. A steaming pile of something, that's what this is. And from my favorite Barbarian subclass feature to my favorite Warlock subclass feature, Hurl through Hell. So this one just got nerfed, but the nerf here is not small. With both the 2014 Player's Handbook version and the Playtest 5 version, you hit a creature, you use this feature, and then you send them through hell for a round, and they either took damage or potentially took damage when they got back. I mean, the damage was nice, but the really cool part was sending them on the trip in the first place. Now, they get a charisma saving throw to just negate the whole thing. So the 14th level feedback feature is now potentially burn one legendary resistance of the big enemy. And that doesn't sound even a little bit fun. I mean, if the feature needed a nerfing, fine, but I think it got over-nerfed, and I'm sad because this was a personal favorite of mine. Now, the Playtest 5 Hex spell was not popular. I get that. A lot of figures figured it had been nerfed. I'm not sure it was. I mean, for a standard 1st through 4th level Warlock, it was going to be functionally exactly the same, and if you upcast it to 3rd level, it was arguably better than the old Hex. And I went through the math on that in a previous video, but going back to the old Hex honestly doesn't bother me. And I assume this means they're going to be going back to the old Hunter's Mark II, and again, I don't really have a problem with that. However, the Playtest 5 version of Eldritch Blast had one change from the original. It tied the scaling of Eldritch Blast at 5th, 11th, and 17th level to your Warlock level instead of your character level. And that's absolutely a nerf. I mean, for multi-class Warlocks, it's a nerf. For straight-class Warlocks, it made no difference at all, meaning that change created an incentive for a 2nd level Warlock to actually stick with Warlock rather than switch out to Sorcerer for their remaining levels. And I think a lot of us figured that this change was, sure, going to make the 2nd level Warlock dip less appealing, but that was probably a good thing for the game as a whole. I mean, a high level Warlock probably should be better with Eldritch Blast than a Sorcerer with a Warlock dip. But they've reverted it. So the Warlock dip is back. In fact, with Invocations available from level 1, you maybe don't even need a 2-level dip anymore. I mean, you probably want the 2-level dip anyway to get Agonizing Blast plus Repelling Blast. So I guess you still need 2 levels. So now, if you want to be an Eldritch Blast expert, you need 2 levels of Warlock. But if you want to be an expert with weapons, then go straight Warlock. That seems ass backwards to me. So that's the stuff I really didn't like. Now there's other stuff I liked or kinda liked in this playtest, but these are smaller things. And I will be going through this playtest with a fine-tooth comb in future videos, but I wanted to give an overview of the stuff I really liked, the stuff I kinda liked, and the stuff I really didn't like. But lots more playtest 7 stuff to come. I hope you'll join me. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. These videos are made possible by my patrons on Patreon, and I want to thank Airhead, and Alex R, and Vo, and Bloody9, and Atherzone, CJ, Chris C, Clement Brunette, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Eric Wasserman, Evan Getting, FBKO5, Gishlife, Lightfoot, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jariru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Lars V, Mark D, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Speed Shadow, Thunderlock, Valazil, and William Whittles today. And thanks to all my patrons. If you would be interested in supporting this channel, please check the link to my Patreon in the video description. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will talk to you probably on Friday.